Thank you very much. Thank you for making time. I know this is probably the dreaded homework hour at home, and you're handing that off and hoping it'll go well for someone. I appreciate you taking the time to be here, and I'd really like to say thank you to the Eagle-Hill School and to Smart Kids for supporting this event, specifically to Jane, who, as she mentioned, I've known for 12 years now, I think. And you had my father come and do a talk one day. It's a family affair. And then Ben Foss, who I've known for 5 years, but it feels like a lifetime. Anyway, now I was really, he always touches me with his comments. And when he said it's the best book he's ever read, that's of course because he's read 3 books. So we're competing with Sea Spot Run and something about Cub Scouts, I don't know. That's an important qualifier to his compliment. So what I'd like to do today is try and spend maybe 20 to 30 minutes and then do some questions, because I don't want to hold you here too late on a school night. And I want to make this a space that is a safe space for conversation. We're dealing with some very personal and complicated issues here. And they're issues that I try and use myself as a guinea pig in the book to demonstrate where I think dyslexia should go. And the headline to this is that dyslexia should be about strengths, not about shame. Up until now, we have thought of this as a disease, as something that you need to cure, and we need to start thinking of it as a profile and something you should become proud of over time. Now, that's not an easy thing to change for an individual, and it's certainly not an easy thing to change for an institution. But I believe that the people in this room can actively accelerate that process by implementing some of the things I talk about in this book. So why don't we move forward a slide. I'm here as the founder of an organization called Headstrong Nation. Headstrong is the national organization for adults who are dyslexic. This is the new Headstrong website. I highlight it just because I encourage people to visit it in order to take advantage of the resources there. There are videos that will teach you about how to use technology, how to talk to a teacher. There's a PowerPoint presentation that your own child can give at their own IEP meeting in order to explain who they are, and so on. You'll notice not a lot of text, much video, and I think that's also speaking to how we like to approach the world. Now, why don't we flip back to the PowerPoint presentation, thank you, and go on into mode there, great. So that's one hat I'm wearing. The other hat I'm wearing, we'll go down a notch, is benfoss.com. I'm an author and the author of this book, The Dyslexia Empowerment Plan. It has gone well in the launch. I've been a little surprised at the feedback we've gotten. This was the review in Publishers Weekly, which gave it a starred review, which my editor was very excited about. I didn't really understand what it meant, but apparently there's only 1 star, and if you get it, it's a good thing. So that's great. It's either starred or not. That's basically the way they review. So thumbs up, thumbs down, I guess. I don't know. But they liked it. And you can follow me on Twitter. I encourage you to do that, because that's a great place to kind of keep track of new and interesting things that are coming along. So now let's get into something more interesting. We'll go forward one more. I want to show you this image of what dyslexia looks like in the brain. And I want to notice something as a challenge that I have faced becoming a public figure in this space. I look really competent. I have a suit on and a tie, and my parents went to fancy schools and I went to fancy schools, and I know how to have conversations and send thank you notes. So I appear competent, which on one hand makes me very satisfying to a parent to look at and think, my child will be like Ben, and that'll work out nicely. That's a good theory, right? But it's also very important to understand that I am also incompetent in some very targeted areas. I don't spell well, I don't read well, I don't transcribe directions well, and I have real problems when it comes to this. Not too long ago, I was invited to do a speech at the International Dyslexia Association, and I was at the president's dinner. I'm going to give a speech, it's going to be a big deal, and I was feeling terrible, so I took a Tylenol, and I felt worse, so I took another Tylenol, and the next day I was leaving, and I took a third Tylenol, I felt even worse, and then the 5th day I'm leaving the conference, and I look at the bottle, and it's Tylenol PM. And I had been taking downers throughout the entire. So this competent guy can blow some pretty important stuff, and I'd like to highlight that this is current. Now, this is a brain image on the left of a non-dyslexic and a dyslexic on the right, I'm literally the guy on the right. This was a study done at Stanford Medical Center when I was a graduate student there. And that's actually the activity in my brain. It's a functional magnetic resonance image, which tracks the amount of blood and oxygen being used by that part of the brain. And that's me trying to read nonsense words. And it doesn't work, as you can tell. Like, it's like a Christmas tree and, like, you know, crickets over here, right? And so I think it's very important that when I'm, you know, explaining who I am, I like to show this as science. The other thing that I've done, and in the book I've actually did this, it was great fun talking to my editor at Random House and pointing out that I wanted to have some severe misspellings in the book. And this is not book culture, I can tell you. But I will tell you at the end of the introduction, I reprinted the first few pages and I put them in as I wrote them in the first instance. Now, it's a slight head fake because I no longer write with my hands anymore. I talk and my computer writes for me. But I actually listened to them and transcribed them, just in real time, just I made my best effort. So you can. So this is then a blog that I wrote for the National Center for Learning Disabilities. It went up last week, and it's sort of about me and an introduction of me and all these kind of things. Great, lovely. Now let's go forward one slide. This is what I wrote when I listened to it and tried to transcribe it, without the benefit of speech software and spell check and grammar check and an editor who then looks over it and cleans up anything that's left. Now, I can get it 95% of the way from this to what you saw on the other page on my own, but I emphasize that this is not in the past. And so when you look at your child's spelling and you work on your child's spelling, get over it. Don't worry about your kid learning to spell. It doesn't matter. In fact, you can be doing severe damage by focusing on these metrics when you are actually reinforcing a sense that your child could be unworthy if they fail in that category. What you need to emphasize to them is that their strengths matter more than their weaknesses. And the fact that I still can't spell didn't prevent me from going to Stanford Law School and Business School. And it's very important that you hold these two ideas in your head at the same time. These two are not mutually exclusive. It's not easy. You need to adjust certain things in your life pattern to make that possible. But it is not a linear path from spelling well in first grade to getting into a good graduate school. In fact, you can be terrible at the first thing and do great at the last thing. It's very important to keep those two ideas in your head simultaneously. So notice this as you think about it. Let's go forward a slide. I also want to talk about the entire rubric of learning disabilities. And I hate the term learning disabilities. Why? Because I don't like the word learning there. I have a disability, but it's in spelling. I have no disability in learning. And none of my peers who are dyslexic or any other thing, and when I say dyslexia, I mean dyscalculia, dysgraphia, dyspraxia, all of the different disses and all of the central auditory processing disorder. I use the word dyslexia just because it's the word that's been around the longest. And it's the word that everyone knows, and it's the word that is one that we can make sure my phone is off. It is one that we can make sure that we can embrace with some knowledge of what it is. Now, when I say those things, when I say, you know, look at the rubric, this is part of one of the tests that is used to establish your baseline intelligence. This is a measure of how quickly you can do it. I believe it's from the Wechsler test of adult intelligence. So in this quiz, they ask you to pick the three objects that will create the object on the top, right? Let's do that. Well, let's see. I think they're probably going for 6, 1, and 2. But it never occurred to them that you might say stack objects. I could make this same object out of using 5, 2, and 6, where 2 sits on top of 5, because it's not a three-dimensional vision they're giving me right here. And if I was to answer in that more creative and more interesting way, I would fail their test. Now, I think I actually gave you a better answer than the answers that they are going to have on their little checkboxes. The thing about dyslexia is that we don't even know there's a box. So when people talk about thinking outside the box, like, screw the box. And that's a very important thing for you to notice when you think about your child. So these measures that we're using, they're designed to create conformity, uniformity, and in some ways, oppression. And I think that we need to decenter those models and come up with a better way to do it, which is to start measuring things that matter, and then we have data that tell us matter. So let's go forward, please. This is one of the things I measure in the book, which is children's strengths. These are 8 areas of strength that I have seen in dyslexics. It's somewhat through my own personal experience, but it's also through some systematic research. When I was at Intel, I was the director of access technology. I did face-to-face interviews with over 200 dyslexics and their families looking at the strength patterns that I saw in those folks. And what I saw were these: verbal, social, narrative, spatial, kinesthetic, visual, mathematical, scientific, and musical. These are the areas where you will tend to see strength. And you get famous people to sort of check these boxes for us. Musical, you've got Cher, you've got Harry Belafonte. There's an opening playbill for you. Verbal, you might have someone like myself. I'm quite verbal. I'm very easy at being verbal. Why? Because I can't read my notes in the first place, and therefore I don't use them. If you go and look at other famous verbal people, you might think of someone like Anderson Cooper or Keira Knightley, both dyslexic. Social, the current governor of this state is dyslexic, and I would guess he's pretty social. He's probably good, whether you like him or not. He's probably good at remembering people's names and figuring out the relationships between people and all those types of things. If you go over to narrative, you have people like John Irving, dyslexic. Anne Rice, if you've read Interview with the Vampire, dyslexic, and on and on and on. If you go down to spatial, people who can think in 3 dimensions. I love a gentleman named Steve Walker. If anyone has ever seen him out there, there's a great video about him on the Headstrong website, and that's looking at his ability to think. He can actually build a machine in his head in 3 dimensions and have it running and understand the thermodynamics, all just looking at it inside his head. Kinesthetic, you got people like Magic Johnson, or people like Stephen Redgrave, who's the greatest rower in the history of the Olympics, all dyslexic. Visual, people like Robert Rauschenberg. Mathematics, scientific, the winner of the Nobel Prize in Medicine 2009, dyslexic. So these strengths are there in the population. Now, I'm not arguing that we are inherently better than mainstream people about this, but I'm arguing it's much more important that we find our strengths, because we're not going to find the front door to the school or the book open. And so we're going to need to play on that strength in order to get in there. Think of it this way. If your child's brain were a geographic location and you're trying to get information in, there are 3 types of reading. There's eye reading, there's ear reading, and there's finger reading. Blind people read with their fingers. They use Braille. Now, would we claim that person is not reading when they look at Braille and they run their finger across it? No, it's quite impressive. They're decoding, they're doing all kinds of things. It's great. I read with my ears. I read literally over 100 books a year using audiobooks, because I can do it at 4x listening to the speed and do this kind of stuff. Then there's eye reading, which is mainstream reading. So generally people are PCs, we're Macs. That's it. Like, that's the model, right? There's a mainstream and there's a side thing. Now, notice that different is not worse in that context. In that metaphor, Mac and PC, most people here would probably take a Mac over a PC. But, I picked that metaphor for a reason. Now, I think it's important to understand that in that context, you need to find your person's strengths. So let's go forward 1, please. This is mine. I use myself in the book. This is my profile. Verbal, social, good at telling a story, terrible musician. I probably could draw myself out of a paper bag, but I'm not going to end up doing anything really significant. I also had Ben Powers do this. So Ben, we'll go forward 1. Ben did this thing, and it's fascinating to see. And I love what this does, because it doesn't put a primacy on any one of these values. It's just a geography. And so you can do this on the headstrongnation.org website. You can go and map your own child's strengths, and you can print this out. Take this in to talk with the teacher about your child and say, look, I've done some research and mapping, and these are the strengths we need to be trying to emphasize and think about and talk through with your child. Let your child take this in and talk with their teacher about it, if they're verbal. If they're over here in the visual and the musical, maybe they don't do the song. If they have a song about it, make a picture. So play with strengths. Now, the other thing you want to measure is your child's emotional health. Emotional health is the single most important thing for you to measure in this context. And in the research process of writing this book, I read a great piece by a guy named Gershon Kaufman, who wrote literally The Psychology of Shame. It's the definitive clinical textbook on this subject matter. Gershon, when he, and I've spoken with him, and when he looked at the history of individuals who had what at the time was considered to be the disability of illiteracy. This is what they called a person who's an adult dyslexic. He said the level of shame experienced in their childhood over this issue is equivalent in magnitude to those they find in people who were victims of incest. That's the level of pain you're dealing with here. And I've had friends in my community say it's like slow-drip trauma. Every day in school, it's a Chinese water torture test of shame coming at you. Let me define shame for you. Shame is being told you are unworthy because of something you are, as opposed to something you did. So if I cheat on my taxes, or I steal a cookie from the cookie jar, I have done something which I can remediate by apologizing or paying a fine and repairing with my community. If I feel bad about the fact that I'm from New Hampshire, I am permanently from New Hampshire. I grew up there, and I could lie, like saying from Vermont. Well, I was actually born in Connecticut, whatever. The key point is if that thing, if I don't like that, then I feel bad about myself. And the beauty and the complexity of shame is the only person who can enforce shame is the individual. No one outside you can enforce shame. Think about civil rights protesters trying to get to a lunch counter in Alabama in the 1950s. Here are people who were being told by people around them they were unworthy. They had people with dogs and fire hoses attacking them, saying, "You are scum." Did they feel shame about their blackness? No. Because they felt like they were doing something meaningful for the world. They were going to be equal with others. And they had internalized for themselves that they were not broken, just as your child is not broken. And if you are an adult dyslexic, because this doesn't come from the water, and therefore some of you are, that means you're not broken. And it's the process of unpacking that and supporting it that will make you freer in this arena. Let's go forward a slide. So then I measured this. This was based on research that was done by Marshall Braskin, outstanding researcher who worked at one point as the chief clinical psychologist for Charles Schwab. Charles Schwab, also dyslexic. It's kind of like Canadians. I have this list in my head that we can just roll out at any point. I don't know any of the Canadian dyslexics though, so. And these are the vectors that turn out to be important. He had 6 of them. I added 2 of my own based on my own research. Resiliency, integration of the specific learning disability. So that's the willingness of an individual to participate in a public way around this. So were I to ask people who are dyslexic to stand up, people who stand up easily and say, "I'm dyslexic," they integrate it. They are very comfortable. Now, I want to stress that is a risky thing to do in a lot of rooms. There are people who I've talked to who are partners at law firms who have a dyslexic child who will not talk about it at work because they're concerned that other people will judge them. I'm like, a couple things, hey, you're a partner already. So you might think about it, but I also think it's important to recognize that I would never rush someone. People have to come to this in their own time and in their own path. Ben Powers and I have talked about how it can take years for certain issues to come to light and to open and to get easy for people. And I'm still on this path. There was a period in my life when I hated books. I wanted literally, like you would ask me about a library and it'd be like kindling. Like that was my theory of what a library was, right? And it was the medium, the specific medium of books, because they had been part of my oppression as a young person. And as I was liberating, I had to go through a phase where I came to hate them, right? But then I wrote one. And that got weird when Random House shipped 30 copies of a book with my name on it. It was like I was going back to a building that I'd been forbidden to enter and found my name over the door. It was like this weird head moment for myself. And I realized that the thing was just paper. It was just trees. It's just an object. And for some people, it's an escape into wonderful learning and joy. And I realized that the anger I was carrying was actually covering some residual shame I was still feeling about never having been included in that conversation. And now that I get the little magic key where I get to sign a book, suddenly I'm like, well, I'm okay with books now. That's me unpacking quite recently a piece of my own shame that's still there. So this is an ongoing evolution. I will walk through these quickly. Self-awareness, your ability to understand your own strengths and weaknesses. Proactivity, do you get up in the morning and want to go do something right away? Emotional stability, do you act proportionately to the emotional situation? So do you get a little frustrated when you fail a spelling test and you get very angry if you fail an entire grade? Or do you get a little bit excited when someone gives you a cookie and get extremely excited when you get into college? Or are they reverse? spelling test, implosion, tears, screaming, right? Fail third grade, whatever, right? That's not a good, emotional stability. Goal setting, setting appropriate goals. I set poor emotional goals for myself when I was young, poor goals. As a freshman, I wanted to make varsity on the soccer team. This is an unreasonable goal for a freshman to make varsity, but I was going to prove I was worthy. And I had overreached on what I thought I could do because I wanted to try and prove something to people. But it was out of balance to where I was. Maybe sophomore year I could have made it. Junior year, I made it. Actually, sophomore year I kind of snuck in the back door, but it was not really whatever. Social supports. Do you tell people who you are? Do you let people know, hey, I'm having a hard day about this, it's kind of complicated? Or, man, I just won a great prize and it's exciting and I want people to come over and have a party about it. Interaction with people, measuring that. And then possibility thinking. The ability to see the possible in a particular situation. The ability to upend and twist and go a different direction than what people are expecting. And I'm not talking about lemons into lemonade, I'm actually talking about entrepreneurship. If you look at entrepreneurship, and I mean entrepreneurship broadly, certainly business people, but also people in government and people at nonprofits are entrepreneurial thinkers. Smart Kids, entrepreneurial thinking. This is a new organization that has now matured into a stable and long-term organization, but when you started it, it was a risk-taking venture. There was all kinds of questions about what to do and should we have a name and how, all these different types of things. 35% of American entrepreneurs are dyslexic. That's an amazing number, especially given that we're between 10 and 20%. I go for 10% as pure dyslexia in the population, so that's over 3 times the representation. We're less than 1% of middle managers in Fortune 500 companies, because we're not so good at the turn in your expense report on time practice, right? Like, that didn't work out so well. I still have assistants chasing me from my Intel days wondering when I'm going to turn in some expense report. So the key thing, though, is that as a dyslexic, it is absolutely the perfect training to be an entrepreneur. Why? Because we learn to fail. And you know what a great entrepreneur is? Someone who failed in business about a dozen times, and then it worked. And that's a great business, because you have to keep attempting and getting back up and trying another one and varying it. Let's make it blue, and let's try to do it through the mail, and let's do it online. And The practice is, when you look at them, the top 10 dyslexics by wealth are worth $30 billion. And that's taken the guy who started IKEA at $4 billion, which I don't think is the right number, because a couple months ago or a couple years ago he was worth $40 billion, and then suddenly his family's worth just as much. It was a weird little tax game, I think, that happened there. So maybe it's $70 billion, but it's a lot of money, right? And if you look at companies like Maker Smart, that's a good one, AT&T Wireless, Sprint, DreamWorks, Steven Spielberg has just announced that he's dyslexic. If you look at companies like Kinko's, Schwab, Virgin, they're all run and founded by dyslexics. That's an incredible thing to think about, what we're missing out on if we don't support kids emotionally. The other half of it is we are 41% of the prison population in the United States. 41% of the prison population. Think about the implications of that. There's some implications there of race plus disability will lead you to a different situation. Because if you've got too many things in people's perceptions of you that are negative, then you could end up going into bad business. Entrepreneurship, when you're 17 and failing out in school, looks a lot like stealing cars. And that can then lead to doing other things, and pretty soon you may be running a very successful business in large-scale cocaine distribution world. Who I highlighted in the book did. A guy named Sean Stevens did 17 years in federal penitentiary. He came out, and he then became an advisor to the mayor in the city of Columbus on anti-gang programs, and now runs a book and learning center in Columbus, Ohio. Amazing guy. One of the things I do in the book, the Dyslexia Empowerment Plan, is I emphasize people that are much more approachable heroes for kids. Because we hear about Charles Schwab all the time, but the thing is, nobody in this room is going to become that wealthy. Maybe in Southport, but that's a lot of money and power that individual has, and to hold that up as the symbol for the dyslexic kid is really unfair. And I prefer to think of people who are doing activism in their local community as a great model for your child to try and emulate and for you to emulate. So let's just click through this quickly, and I want to show you something. This was me, and this is charted in the book, me at age 10. I was extremely resilient, and I was always solving problems. For example, I didn't read, so how did I learn To Kill a Mockingbird? Ross DeMont, my friend, who sat next to me on the bus. And every day I'd say, Ross, I love this book. It's a great book. What do you think about what happened last night? And then he'd tell me. So I'm lying to him, right? I'm not using social supports. I'm not willing to be identified as dyslexic, but I also was highly resilient, and I was being possibly thinking if I could find out what's in the book that way, right? It was great. So that was me at age 10. Move forward. Age 27. Here I am in law school, and they forget to give me an accommodation one day, and I go to war with them. I get the Dean for Student Affairs, and then up to the Dean, and I'm like, why haven't you provided me with this? And I'm fighting them, but I never tell any of my classmates about it, and so I go home that day exhausted without anyone to tell this story to. And so I'm carrying it alone, right? 2 years later, I figured out what happened was I started talking to people. And I remember going to a finance professor and saying, no eye contact, I'm dyslexic, and I'm wondering if, he goes, oh, so am I. And I was like, you're dyslexic? He goes, yeah. He goes, do you want to use Excel on the exam? And I was like, yeah. That'd be great. And he's like, well, I'm not testing whether you can do, basic math, Ben. I'm testing whether you can do finance. We have accountants for basic math. And I was like, okay, cool. I think accountants too, yeah, that'd be good. That communication opened up, but I still wasn't telling people. And now, I went back to my 10th reunion with my former wife. We were married at the time, and we went, and we're walking around, and people are like, what are you doing? Oh, I just wrote this book on dyslexia. Oh, great. Why dyslexia? And she looks at me and goes, they don't know, do they? And I was like, no. I had just totally hidden myself. And that is another component of shame, is hiding. The essence of shame is hiding, is trying to be not seen. And man, are we good at hiding when we want to hide. We are snipers on a hill. You will never see us. We will blend in and not be seen. So let's go forward. I made this product called the Intel Reader. You can take a photograph of printed material, read it aloud. I emphasize technology in the book and how to use it. One more, please. There's lots of great technology out there. Learning Ally has human-recorded audio books, very low cost, great service, and then I'll tell you a little bit about another service they're doing, Parent Ally, new service that they're actually going to be rolling out. You, if you become a member of Learning Ally, can have a person, you can call an 800 number, who's a parent who's been through it, and can give you some one-on-one coaching on what's going forward. Amazing service that they're starting up. Check it out. Bookshare does digitally recorded books, so they're computer voice books. They're fascinating because they actually get the stuff immediately from the publishers, and it's online the day the book's out. Great resource. I love just using basic Apple and Windows products for speech. They're really easy to use. You can have books read aloud to you with a couple of keystrokes. On the Headstrong website, there's videos that show you how to do this, headstrongnation.org. Dragon Naturally Speaking, Claro is another speech software. But when I think about this, I also think about the perception of that technology. And you can't just stick technology in your kid's hands and say, problem solved, right? There's a training issue, but there's also the shame issue. If I made the cure for shame, which this is, it's not a cure for dyslexia, because dyslexia is not a disease. And just a little side note here, I would encourage you to think about your own, when you hear language around this, it's built into how we talk about dyslexia. You were diagnosed, right? I was not diagnosed as being from New Hampshire. I just am, right? Now, whereas on the other hand, I am remediated around my dyslexia. No. We're going to remediate the environment around me so that the environment can accommodate me properly. So we're going to put in ramps where there were stairs. We're remediating the stairs, not the guy in the wheelchair. That's what we're going to do. Overcoming dyslexia, right? Why do I need to overcome being from New Hampshire? I just am. It's just part of who I am, and it's fine. It's not a big deal. We're going to be, this is comorbid with ADHD. Comorbid is a nasty term, right? It is in the profile as well. That's it. It's just a profile, right? And watch that evolution. Now, when you also look at this technology, it can connote shame. And when we launched this product, we got great press coverage. We had Walt Mossberg gave us a review. It was wonderful. And then I saw this. One forward, one please. Intel reads books To the lazy and the infirm. This was their headline, and they kept it up for 4 years. I highlighted it in a blog I wrote 3 weeks ago, and someone on Twitter went at them, right? So click over to Chrome for a second. Sorry, Chrome. And to the last tab. This is the headline now. Isn't that nice? And that was an activist. It wasn't actually me, because we approached them 4 years ago and they didn't do anything. This guy on Twitter was like, hey, you should feel ashamed of what you just said. And the next day they changed it. That's a movement, which is really cool. So let's slip back to the thing, and I want to move quickly through these. Down one more. Important to understand the law. It's in the book. These are 3 acts you should understand well. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on them because they're too technically detailed, but think of the law as your bodyguard. It's the person who's standing there to your side with an earpiece in, ready to step in if they need to, but you actually don't want them to step in because then it gets a little messy and expensive and time-consuming for everybody. So I'd say what you want to do is let them know you know the law, but not actually threaten anybody. So that's what the bodyguards are for. Moving forward, one more. I want to also tell you that you have an opportunity, and this is sort of wrapping things up. You have an opportunity to be part of something bigger than yourself. There's a liberation movement going on here around the 2.3 million kids in the public school system who are dyslexic and the 30 million people in the US and the, 600 million planet-wide who are dyslexic. Think about that number. It's there in China, it's there in France. I love traveling and meeting with dyslexics because they always take you to interesting places. This is why it's happening. So this is going to be the space bar multiple times. Back in the day, we had Brown versus Board of Education. Keep hitting the space bar. That then became Education for All Handicapped Children Act 1975. Then I'm identified. That's me without the time. I was identified, yes. Hold please. Then I was identified, and I didn't want to talk about this at all, right? Once I was identified, I hid my dyslexia as much as I could. Recently, a book came out called The Dyslexic Advantage. Great book. Get this book. Brock and Fernet Edie have done a really systematic brain-based evaluation of the strengths of dyslexia. I think it's an outstanding thing, and I think it's starting a movement towards dyslexia and talent being something we talk about. Again, forward, please. Now, what do adult dyslexics have? Kids. Now, this is not my kid, it's my friend's kid. But, picture me a kid. Key point, this doesn't come to the water, and when you have a child who's identified, you have a reason to start talking about who you are publicly. Forward one more, please. So if the red line is the line of people who are identified as dyslexic, scale being about 10,000 at the bottom and it's logarithmic, 30 million at the top. The number of people who have been identified has gone up dramatically, and this is evident in places like Learning Ally. Their numbers of people who were in their membership went from 10,000 blind people to 300,000 all dyslexics that they added. Huge boom, right? Next, this is the population of those who are talking about it. And that's a really interesting thing because right now that's starting to come up. You just saw Steven Spielberg announce his dyslexia. It's beginning to be a thing to talk about. And that creates community and an opportunity to attack shame. So that's where change is happening. So one more. That's the engine of the movement. This is the historical trend that is driving this in the long term. So you got support coming with you if you do this. Forward one more. Finally, I'll close with organizations that I think are really doing wonderful things. This is not a comprehensive list, it's just some ones that I think are doing great work. Obviously, Smart Kids Locally and Decoding Dyslexia. I put up the Connecticut chapter, I think that's Connecticut, right? They also are in now 35, although it's sort of rabbits out there. They keep popping up all over. Their parents, basically, they are the pissed off moms and dads who are out there saying, we got to change this. They just passed 3 laws in New Jersey. They had Governor Chris Christie sign these laws supporting dyslexia in the schools. They're doing a great job. And then National Center for Learning Disabilities, outstanding place, information resources. I've got 6 blogs that they've published up there that are, I think, worth reading. Eye to Eye mentoring program for college students working with elementary school students. Wonderful program, outstanding outcomes. And Dyslexia Bill is about to come online. This is a website for kids that will have information for them so they can learn about their strengths and who they are. So these are the people I think are really friendly, great organizations. Forward one more, please. I want to end here by saying I would encourage everyone to join the Headstrong Nation if you have an opportunity. Obviously, we take donations, and if you are able to go to the website and do that, it's highly appreciated because we drive that money into creating the movement. We do this by gathering leaders in the community every year to talk through what they're going to do. One attendee last year called it the base camp at Mount Everest, that you come back in and you get sheltered and some food and some encouragement, and then you go back out and climb. I'll end this way, and I want to ask you to participate and maybe move your bodies a little bit. Ben Powers, I know you're dyslexic, aren't you? Aren't you? Yes, you are. I am. Would you mind standing up if you're dyslexic, Ben Powers? Because I bet you are. So I couldn't have, I mean, he'd said it earlier, but that's how I know he's dyslexic, and that's how I know it. Now, I'm not going to demand that anyone who's dyslexic stand up, because what I said earlier about that law partner having people who would find out and it could be problematic. But if you're ever going to stand up in a room, this might be a good room to try it out in. We can even turn off the cameras if you want. Actually, we won't, but don't stand up if you don't want to be filmed. But I would encourage you, please, if you're dyslexic, would you please stand up? Look at that. All right, let's give them a round of applause. There are two types of homeowners in this area, as opposed to real estate agents, which are some of the people who are in the field but aren't actually, you know. It's also the parents are also homeowners, because you're doing this every night. You're doing 2 hours of homework struggle, you're fighting with your school. So if you're a parent of a dyslexic or someone in that community, would you please stand up and we'll give you a round of applause. Thank you very much. And finally, if you're willing to stand with us, and you haven't stood up yet, if you're willing to stand with us, feel free to stand up. There we go. All right. Thank you very much. I really appreciate your time. We'll be doing a book signing. Why don't we take 1 or 2 or 3 questions just while we've got people here, and then we'll try and get out of here in less than an hour total. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time.